The American Civil War was fought between North and South, but it was also fought by immigrants who had barely set foot on American soil before answering the call. In the fall of 1863, a 19-year-old Norwegian farm boy from Minnesota found himself huddled in the mud of a Georgia battlefield. His name was Christian Knudson. He was a private in Company K of the 15th Wisconsin Infantry Regiment, known to history as the Scandinavian Regiment. By the time the Battle of Chickamauga ended, Christian was a prisoner of war. 9 months later, he would die alone in the most notorious prison camp in American history and be buried shoulder to shoulder with 13,000 other Union men. This is his story, a story of immigration, sacrifice, and a young man who gave everything for a country he had only known for 11 years. But this is also the story of the men who fought beside him, the Norwegians of the 15th Wisconsin, a regiment that was as flawed and human as it was brave. When the Civil War broke out, Wisconsin's Norwegian immigrants did not hesitate. In that single state alone, between 3,000 and 4,000 men of Scandinavian blood enlisted as volunteers. They joined not because they were drafted, but because they believed. As Waldemar Ager wrote in Colonel Haig and His Boys, it is certain enough for the common man in the North, most especially for the Norwegian immigrant. The opinion prevailed that the war was a fight against slavery. For them, it became practically a holy war, involving moral rather than political objectives. These were men who had left Europe to find freedom in America, and they would not stand by while that freedom was denied to others. Christian Knudson was one of them. He was born on January 2, 1845, in Oppland County, Norway. His parents are Knud Olsen and Berit Knudsdatter. Among his 7 siblings, he had a younger sister named Siri, my second great-grandmother. When Christian was 10 years old, in 1853, the family crossed the Atlantic and settled in Fillmore County, Minnesota, the heart of Norwegian America. By 1860, 15-year-old Christian worked as a farmhand, learning English and becoming an American. On December 18, 1861, just 16 years old, Christian Knudson enlisted in Company K of the 15th Wisconsin. The regiment was known as the Scandinavian Regiment, with 90% of its soldiers born in Norway, Denmark, or Sweden. Company K called themselves Klassen Guards, after the regimental chaplain Claes L. Klassen. But being Norwegian in the Union Army was not always easy, even among themselves. The men of the 15th Wisconsin came from different parts of Norway, and they spoke different dialects. A soldier from Telemark might have trouble understanding a soldier from Trøndelag. Sometimes 2 Norwegians had to resort to English just to be able to understand each other. And then there was the problem of disease. Many of these men came from remote areas in the Norwegian countryside. They had never been exposed to common childhood diseases, measles, mumps, whooping cough. When they arrived at the crowded training camps like Camp Randall, those diseases swept to the regiment. Many soldiers got sick and died before they ever saw a battlefield. The 15th Wisconsin also had a reputation, not for bravery, at least not at first, but for being bad at discipline and training. These are farmers and laborers, not soldiers. They had enlisted because they believed in the cause, not because they wanted to march in straight lines and salute officers. Colonel Hans Christian Haig, the regiment's commander and a Norwegian immigrant himself, understood his men, but he also knew he had to shape them into an effective fighting force. One area where Haig had to be firm was with beer. The Norwegians loved their beer, but Colonel Haig would only allow 6 men at a time to go on leave for just 2 hours. If a soldier went absent without leave but was found sober, his punishment was to chop wood for 1 day. But if he went absent without leave while drunk, he had to chop wood for 2 days. It was a practical punishment, and it probably saved more than a few men from more serious discipline. The 15th Wisconsin also celebrated the 17th of May, Norwegian Constitution Day, as a holiday, and they celebrated it so lustily on at least one occasion that they were disciplined afterwards. Even in the middle of war, they remembered their homeland. On February 11, 1862, Christian was officially mustered into federal service. He was 17 years old. Less than a month later, on March 2, 1862, the 15th, 16th, and 17th Wisconsin regiments were ready to set off for the front. The men were paid full from the day they enlisted through March 1st. At 8 o'clock in the morning, they left Camp Randall in a blinding snowstorm. They marched to the station where thousands of relatives had gathered. When the train left, there was the waving of hats and handkerchiefs, as one might expect. But the locomotive had not gone very far because it got stuck in the snow. An extra engine had to be brought up to pull them out. That evening, they arrived in Chicago, where it was raining and the streets were full of mud. They marched to the courthouse, where they were met by the Chicago Norwegians, who presented them with a beautiful silk flag. The regiment had already had 2 flags, so now they had 3. This new flag was American, but it carried the Norwegian lion on it. After the ceremonies, they marched back to the train, and there the Norwegians treated them to coffee, for which they were very thankful. Christian Knudson and the 15th spent the first year of war marching and fighting. In a letter dated May 25, 1862, Private Thomas Emerson of Company C wrote home about receiving new uniforms, much more attractive than the ones they had before. But he had another observation, one that spoke directly to why so many Norwegians had volunteered. The rebels had left so much property behind that the company had lots of work to do, and he wrote this: "We meet lots of rebels here, but they call themselves Unionists. All the slaves run away from their masters and come to our camp where they can feel safe, where they are beyond the reach of the cattle 9 tails. They are very happy because we came to free them from their cruel slavery." Emerson also asked his family to send him the ballot list so he could see who had been elected officials back in his township. Even in the middle of the war, these immigrant soldiers never forgot they were also citizens. By August 12, 1863, another member of the 15th wrote home about the rations they received. They were given pork, beef, hard bread, which they called crackers, peas, and grits, but never milk or bread. Those they had to buy if they wanted any, and even for money, it could not always be had. Butter cost 50 cents a pound, milk cost 25 to 30 cents a quart, so things were not cheap. But he noted that they did have excellent water. There was no shortage of it, as they had both a river and a spring water in the area. In September 1863, the 15th Wisconsin marched towards northwest Georgia. The men felt something in the air, a premonition that the coming fight would be a hot one. In the Norwegian regiment, there was a tradition before battle. All decks of cards were taken from pockets and thrown away. Cards were fine as a pastime, and the men could get new ones when the fighting ended, but they could not risk dying with a deck of cards in their pocket or knapsack. The regiment had left Camp Randall a year earlier with 800 men. Now, on the eve of Chickamauga, only 176 remained. The rest had been killed, wounded, sick, or captured in previous battles. But the 15th had gained a reputation. Whenever there was hard work to be done, felling trees, floating logs for bridge building, it was convenient to call out the 15th. And whenever the regiment was placed in the line of battle, they were always put towards the front, in the most dangerous position where they would catch the first fire. One general, on seeing the 15th, commented to the regiment was composed of men so short that it troubled him. Colonel Haig gave no answer. "You did not give them enough soup," the general explained. "Soldiers must have lots of soup." The 15th did not like this remark, not because they were sensitive about their height, but because they had proven themselves again and again, and while lying there awaiting orders, they had a good opportunity to count the many soups, the many battles they had already survived. The Battle of Chickamauga was fought on September 19th and 20th, 1863. The 15th Wisconsin was thrown into the chaos near Vineyard's farm. At one point during the fighting, the 15th got so far ahead that the commander and his men of another regiment were unaware that they were so close to the front. They mistook the Norwegians for the enemy and opened fire. Caught in the crossfire, the 15th broke and ran, something that had never happened to them before fired at from the rear. But there were no deserters. Behind a barricade of fallen trees, they reassembled. From this improvised fortification, Colonel Haig's brigade made the last attack of the day. They took the field again and captured some artillery. Then they settled down behind the barricade in the woods and held it until darkness fell. But the cost was terrible. The regiment lost more than half its men at Chickamauga. Colonel Hans Christian Haig fell in battle on September 20th. With him fell also many of the 15th's most capable officers. Christian Knudson was captured on that first day of fighting, September 19, 1863. A veteran of the 15th was once asked how it happened that so many Norwegians were taken prisoner of war. His answer revealed the character of these immigrant soldiers. "We did not watch the opportune time to beat it when the others ran," he explained. "We figured we could stick it out a bit longer and a bit longer until it was too late to run, and so it took us." Another veteran added, "Yeah, that's the way it was. We Norwegians in the regiment looked at each other when the others started to run, and then we did not like to turn tail as long as no one else of us did." That was the spirit of the 15th Wisconsin, the same men who struggled with discipline and training, who needed English to understand each other's dialects, who loved their beer and celebrated the 17th of May. Those same men held the line when the others ran, and they paid the price. On March 8, 1864, Christian arrived at the Anderson prison in southwest Georgia. Some 14 or 16 acres of land had been fenced in with high pointed palings. At intervals along the borders, towers and platforms were raised on which the sentinels were mounted. A survivor from Company K remembered the slogan inside those walls: "Root, hog, or die." Inside the stockade, a line of death was drawn. Anyone who ventured beyond that fatal line was shot by the nearest sentinel. The terrain sloped towards a muddy creek from which the prisoners got their water. Men lived in cracks or tents or in caves they dug into the ground. Thousands of ragged, sick, starving men languished their lives away there. The survivor from Company K described the rations. During the last months, they got a daily ration of cornbread, their only source of nourishment, except for some vegetables that were sometimes doled out. The bread was mixed with water and stirred at times in their caps because not all of them had cups or other utensils. Some men even used their shoe for this purpose. And the prisoners died by the thousands. They were called stiffs and were buried in rolls in big trenches dug outside the stockade. The death rate reached 100 men a day. 43 members of the 15th Wisconsin Regiment died at Andersonville. Most of them starved to death or killed by scurvy or abandoned with neglected wounds. 32 of those died specifically from starvation, scurvy, or disease. But there is one remarkable story connected with Andersonville, a story the prisoners themselves called a miracle. A spring burst forth while the 34,000 prisoners were there, faint with thirst. The people said this was God's answer to the many prayers for water sent up to him. The stockade has long since rotted away, and the place where the prison was located is covered by a dense forest, but the spring is still there, still bubbling forth, beautifully roofed over with polished granite. It is called Providence Spring. As far as the prison kept a reckoning of the dead, the last man to die at Andersonville was a Norwegian named Knud Hansen of the 1st Wisconsin Cavalry Regiment. He was laid in grave number 12,848. But 2 men from the 15th Wisconsin survived longer than almost anyone else. Osmond Johnson of Company K and O. Stensland of Company E remained at Andersonville for more than 11 months. They are said to have been the 2 who stayed there the longest and lived. Both were members of the Norwegian Regiment. Christian Knudson was not so fortunate. On June 25, 1864, he was admitted to the hospital. His body was swollen, a condition the prison records called anascara, which is congestive heart failure, often caused by malnutrition and disease. He died on June 26, just 3 months and 18 days inside the stockade. The bodies of the dead were hauled to the burial grounds by the wagon load, exactly as farmers hauled fence posts. They are placed in the trenches 6 feet wide, shoulder to shoulder. Their headstones stand only inches apart to stay. But the dead might have remained unidentified forever, except for the courage of Dorrance Atwater, a former prisoner who secretly copied the death list and smuggled it out in the lining of his jacket. After the war, nurse Clara Barton came to Andersonville with Atwater and a crew of 34 workers. They matched his list with the numbered stakes. One by one, the dead were honored. On August 17, 1865, Clara Barton raised the first American flag over Andersonville National Cemetery. Today, Christian Knudson rests in grave number 2498, his headstone inches from the next in a long trench of the fallen. What did the prisoners talk about in the midst of that misery? The survivor, Captain K, answered, "We did not talk about the money we should make once we are free. Oh no, we talked about our mothers, wives, and sisters, and sometimes about how well we should eat when we returned home. It seemed that every one of us had a good mother. We used to say that if our mothers or sisters could see us in our wretched condition, it would break their hearts." Christian Knutson's mother was Barrett, a woman who had brought him across the ocean when he was 10 years old. She had raised him on a Minnesota farm. She had watched him march off to war. Did she ever learn the details of how he died? We do not know. But we know that Christian thought of her in his final months. Every one of us has a good mother. Not every memory of the war was suffering. In a letter dated July 2nd, 1864, just days after Christian died at Andersonville, another soldier from the 15th wrote about a very different scene. His regiment was camped along a stream getting close to Atlanta. The Union men were on one side of the river, the rebel force on the other. The outposts were stationed on opposite banks, and both groups agreed not to fire at each other. "Then we strolled along the river and chatted like the best of friends," he wrote. "Some of our men and some of the rebels even went out into the river and swam together. They traded tobacco for coffee and had the best of time. Even in the middle of a brutal war, men found moments of shared humanity. It is a small mercy to remember, especially when thinking of those who had no such moments at Andersonville." By that time, the 15th Wisconsin had no more than 70 men well enough to bear arms. Company K alone had lost 23 men, dead, wounded, or captured. Christian Knudson was one that was captured. He never swam in that river, never traded tobacco for coffee, never saw his mother again. Christian Knudson was not a perfect soldier. He was a farm boy who had trouble understanding the dialects of his own countrymen. He had never been exposed to childhood diseases. He probably loved his beer like the rest of them. He joined the regiment that had a reputation for being bad at discipline and training. But when the moment came at Chickamauga, when the others ran, he stayed. And when he was captured, he did not break. He endured the worst hell on earth for 3 months and 18 days, and then he died. He was a farm boy from Upland, a teenager who arrived in America with nothing but hope, a private in Clausen's Guards, Company K, 15th Wisconsin Infantry. He rests today in Georgia soil under a white headstone marked with a number and a name. Grave number 2498, Andersonville National Cemetery. For God and our country.